How do you ask for what you want? It's a question we consider and get asked often in our lives. We can create a lot of drama about how someone will react when we ask them for whatever we want. And this is particularly true when it comes to asking for a promotion, leading a new project, and yes, asking for a raise or more money. Today, you are going to meet Christy Metcalf. Christy is an expert in asking for what you want in your career and life. She is the president and founder of CEO Learning Systems, a company dedicated to helping women make more money without feeling like they need to work harder or sacrifice what's important to them. And make no mistake, everyone will benefit from this episode. And in this episode, you will learn the difference between feeling good and feeling usable or relevant in your job. You'll also learn how to examine your thoughts about money and how they impact your life and career, as well as how to ask for what you want, negotiate a better salary, and get what you are worth. Welcome to episode 140 of the Mid-Career GPS podcast. I'm your host, John Nerrell, and I'm here to help you find the job you love or love the job you have by using my proven 4-step formula. I'm excited to bring you this conversation today. Christy is my first guest in season 3 of the Mid-Career GPS podcast, and I've got more exciting and interesting guests for you in the coming weeks. But before we get to my conversation with Christy, I want to remind you of a free guide on my website. It's called 5 Mistakes Mid-Career Professionals Make and Need to Stop Doing. Giving you a heads up, one of those mistakes is not communicating your value or knowing your worth. And Christy and I talked about that during this episode. But if you want to learn more and get my free guide, either check the show notes or visit my website at johnnerrell.com to download the guide, connect with me, and learn more about what I do specifically if you're interested in one-on-one coaching. Christy Metcalf is an international speaker, trainer, and coach whose 30 years in business have allowed her to work with and learn from the most recognized Fortune 500s, startups, and nonprofits around the globe. Her true gift is helping clients cut through the clutter of what's holding them back and providing the strategy, system, and support to help them take massive action and achieve the results they want. You're going to love this episode, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to Christy Metcalf.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christy Metcalf, and I love helping women make the money they want, 6 and 7 figures, without sacrificing a life and what they want most out of a career and personal life.
Christy, I am looking forward to our conversation today, and we are going to talk about that. But as you and my listeners know, we got to get to know you a little bit first. So tell us what you wanted to be growing up.
Oh my gosh, you made me think about that one. I wanted to be a cardiologist, and there's a story behind that. I lost every grandparent before I was 17 years old to health-related reasons, and I wanted to save the world by becoming a doctor. And I am so glad that I did not take that path, and I followed another path because I think it would have driven me crazy to give people advice about their health, knowing that they weren't going to change it or do anything about it.
What a powerful observation. I can only imagine, especially for people who are in the medical profession, how difficult that can be when they have big hearts and they want to help, but people sometimes don't want to help themselves.
That's right. Yeah. And they have to want to help themselves. So I think it saved me by not going that route in the medical profession. And I found a way to help people in other ways.
Well, you did. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about. So you abandoned this idea about being a cardiologist.
I did.
And what did you pursue in school for your studies?
Well, I actually went to a liberal arts college, did not know really what I wanted to do, except that I wanted to get a job in corporate America. That sort of like became my path. And it was early on that I loved speaking and teaching. And I decided I wanted to go into training and development. And so after I graduated from college, I had this informational interview with a company that I had interned with during the summers. And I told them what my real passion was. And the head of HR looked at me, laughed, and said, "You have absolutely no experience. What could you train people on?" And he suggested that I take a different route and I really learn business and that I go into sales. And at the time I thought, oh my gosh, I don't want to do sales. I don't want to be sleazy, cheesy, salesy. And it was probably the best career advice and move I had ever gotten from anyone. So I did learn. I went into sales. I spent 10 years into a sales career. And then, amazingly enough, very successful. My original sales trainer from early on in the beginning of my career reached out and said, "Are you still interested in doing some sort of training and development?" I said, "Yes." And they said, "We are looking for a sales trainer, somebody who, with your experience and your background." And that's how I sort of navigated into HR and became that trainer, helping people learn and to develop themselves.
What makes a good training?
What makes a good training? I think for me personally, I try to make it applicable and usable and relatable. Like I like to cut through the clutter and make it really simple and straightforward. And you're going to use it when you walk out today to achieve something different. I like to be fun and engaging, but also it has to be relatable. Like people have to be there for a specific reason. And I think that many times we get caught up in feeling good versus being usable.
Tell me more about that.
Well, so my daughter, I have a 13 and 14-year-old daughter, and they like to say that everything they learn in school right now could be learned on the internet. There's Grammarly, there are, math websites, and I think it has to be relatable and there has to be an end in mind with what you're learning. So now I teach women how to make money. I don't think we're taught that. I don't think we're taught how to negotiate or, how to really navigate that career like you talk about so often. And many times we find ourselves midpoint in that career and we are stuck and we don't know how to move because we haven't been taught the skills and given the resources to really navigate that for ourselves. So when I talk about being usable, it really is the things that we gravitate to are, I need to use it right now. Why is YouTube one of the number 2 search engines? Because it teaches people how to do things they don't know how to do.
The whole point about being usable rings very strongly for me right now. So many of the people who listen to this podcast are struggling with that. They're not sure where their value is, or they're clear about it, but they're not getting validated or acknowledged by their current organization. And it's very easy and understandable that we equate value with money.
That's right.
How many times have we heard people say, "I'm not paid enough. I'm not paid market share. I'm not paid what I'm worth"? I want to spend some time digging into this with you. And to start, I really want to pull it back a little bit and just come up with, where do you believe our strongest money thoughts and money values come from?
Yeah, from when we're a child. I've done so much work around this for myself personally. And it really does go back to those money, the way your parents thought about money, the way they talked about money, the way your grandparents and your family members and your friends talked about money. I remember going on a plane for the first time when I was 10 years old and we passed through first class. And my dad looked at me and said, "We're not those kind of people." Right? Which, whether I knew it then or not, imprinted that those people were better than me and I didn't belong or deserve to be in first class. Right? So very subtle that people who are wealthy and have money are arrogant and they're not people that we would like, or people that get ahead and are only money motivated are terrible, thoughtless people. That is not true. right? Or the biggest one that I think I was told is you have to work really hard to make lots of money. That is not true, right? And I see people killing themselves every single day, working well beyond the hours that they're being paid. Most often, when I talk to clients, if we were to really dissect how many hours they're working versus how many hours they're getting paid, sometimes it's minimum wage. Mm-hmm. And that's not value at all.
No, it's not. And the people you work with, can you tell us a little bit about the kinds of people you work with specifically?
Yeah, so I tend to work with women. So I have worked the last 20 years in consulting, worked with big businesses in the aerospace industry, hospitality industry, retail, just about every sector out there. And one of the things that I noticed doing executive and leadership development was that first level management, the room was about 50-50 between men and women. But as I climbed, right, in those leadership development courses, the disparity was visible in that if I had at the executive level, if I had one or two women in the room, that was a lot. And so I noticed that there were women in mid-career who were jumping from corporate jobs into starting their own businesses to have more freedom and flexibility and fun and to really call the shots on their own. But they did not know how to sell themselves once they were in business. They knew their value when they were in a corporation with a big title and a company brand behind them, but they struggled with identifying and creating their own brand for themselves and making money in business. And it really goes back to the habits that they formed early on in their careers back in corporate, in that we have a hard time selling ourselves many times. And I've watched this in the room, in that women, just by nature, there are habits that women employ that men do not. I'll give you a for instance, like women have a hard time talking about the results they produce. Men have no problems doing that. Women talk about the credibility and the education and the certifications that they come to that job with. One is results-based. One is trying to establish identity and credibility. Men don't worry about the credibility. They walk in thinking they've gotten it, right? They don't sell that piece of it. They sell the results. Women have a hard time tooting their own horn. They have a hard time asking for what they want. And that, when you're in business for yourself, as you know, is all about success, right? So literally, I call it, we have to unlearn what we've learned in our careers to then be a successful business owner. It's different from an employee to an entrepreneur.
There's a lot to unpack there, but the first thing that comes to my mind, Christy, is we haven't come as far as we thought we have.
No.
I think about the female leaders that I've had an opportunity to work with and work alongside of, and everything you are hitting on, the pay disparity, the respect in the room, the constant feeling of having to prove themselves as knowledgeable, competent, worthy, equal. We can acknowledge there are some companies and organizations that do a little better job than others, but there's still a larger lift that needs to be had. In our pre-work leading up to the call and the recording today, one of the things you mentioned was how fear holds people back. Can you talk a little more specifically about either where you yourself have been fearful in certain roles or where you have seen the clients you work with been fearful in certain roles?
Yeah, I would love to. So, one of the pivotal moments for me was I was on an assignment several years ago for a client, and I was working abroad, and the work was 25 days at a time. And as a consultant, when you work, you get paid, right? So this was a 6-month assignment. It was in Africa. It took a lot of preparation on the home front to be able to be gone for 25 days. And early on in the contract, I moved work around, I gave work away, and I said no to a lot of things in order to accommodate that contract. It just so happened that several months into it, the client canceled 24 hours before I was supposed to get on a plane and fly there. And the first question that my husband asked was, are you going to get paid for it? Right? That's a great question. Hadn't thought that far into it. I went through my contract. I saw that it was a 14-day cancellation policy. And even though I was within my right to ask for the money, I struggled with that. Right? A business owner. At that point, I had been a business owner for 17 years. And I was afraid that I would either be fired for asking for it, that they would think that I was greedy and they would replace me, that I wouldn't get any more work with this client that I had been working with for 14 years. But the thoughts in my head that spiraled around was, why am I worth asking for this? And I even reached out to a friend who was in contracts and negotiations. And she suggested, so a woman suggested that I ask for half of it and they would negotiate from there. And the more that I thought about it, the more I questioned why I would ask for half of it. And I realized it was fear that was holding me back. Fear of being embarrassed, fear of being told no, fear of being rejected, fired. And so I determined that I would rather ask for it and hear no than to not ask for it at all. And when we got on the call, I talked about miscompensation, and my liaison at the time said, so you expect to be paid for work that you didn't do, point blank, right? And I said, I had to think about that. I said, yes, because this is not just about the money. This is about a contractual agreement between two companies. And for the first time in 17 years, I stood in my power and strength. And he paused and he said, okay, I just needed to hear you ask for it. And it was honestly this awakening that I thought to myself, oh my gosh, is it that easy? Right? So in a 15-minute phone call, I made $54,000. And what came from that, though, was I dug in and I started doing the research. And the research is pretty blaring. When you talk about we have a long way to go, we've come far, but we have a long way to go. So when I looked at the research, women tend not to negotiate their first starting salary right out of school, whether that be college or high school. And men most often do. And over the course of a lifetime, so that first negotiation is somewhere around the $7,000 to $10,000 mark that they give up. But over the course of a career, that equates to about $1 million that a woman will lose over an entire career. That initial starting salary, when she is unwilling to negotiate, that salary will equal somewhere close to $1 million over the course of her career. And when you think about the fact that women usually outlive men by 7 to 9 years, that factor is huge, right? But I think early on it sets a precedent that we are afraid to ask for money. And so it carries through our entire career to where we can never gain what we lost at the very beginning. So then I dug in and I started looking at women business owners. About 75% of women business owners are not making over the $100,000 threshold. And it's not because they're not qualified, they're not good at what they do, they don't have a quality service or product. It's literally because they are afraid to ask for money. And that told me right there that that struggle that I went through those 2 weeks in asking for the money is a huge blaring weakness when it comes to females working, whether it be for themselves or in the corporate space.
As I listen to you share that story, my mind starts going to several people who I can identify that did exactly what you talked about. And I can remember working in one organization where it was an educational nonprofit. It was a fantastic organization. But the idea of negotiating for a salary, especially when a number of the people who I had worked with were teachers, they're beholden to a salary guide. They just get told where they land on the guide and that's it. And to that point, a lot of them didn't think about negotiating.
That's right.
So now you get into the job and all of a sudden you start having these conversations Hopefully they're truthful, but then you
Right.
find out you're not being paid as much as somebody else. And now
That's
you feel
right.
resentment and your anger and you're upset. And for people like that who are listening where they didn't negotiate, they didn't know how to negotiate, and now they're looking for an adjustment or a bump in their pay, what advice would you give for them that they can be a little more confident, to your point, in just asking for it?
Yeah. Well, I work with a lot of those clients, right? And you're not going to make up the loss that was maybe 15 or 20 years ago, but you can start from today and learn how to negotiate. And so, I talk about just asking for it. Like, what is it that you really want, and why aren't you asking for it right now? And we'll go back to that fear, because most often what I hear working with clients is, I am afraid they'll say no and I'll be embarrassed, right? Same thing I thought when I was going to ask for that money of the contract that had been broken, and literally the same thought. But if you don't ask, you don't get. So my words of advice are: number one, it's usually mindset. So the clients who have worked with me will say that the majority of the work that we did and where they needed it the most was mindset. And I don't believe that you can truly do the mindset work on your own. I think it comes down to working with someone, and they are going to call the bluff on the stories that you've been telling yourself that you think is true. And I'm going to go to a story that you just mentioned. Like, people who go into the education career go in thinking that they are going into an industry without money. And so, how can they ask for money when there is no money? But there is money,
There is.
right? It's like people who go to work for a nonprofit. Nonprofits don't have money. Nonprofits do have money. They just file a different tax return,
Yep.
right? So every organization out there has money. You have to determine if you're confident enough to ask for it, and if you are okay hearing the word no. And I think one of the parts of negotiation that I learned in sales is that you have to have a walkaway point. And I don't think that people do that for themselves, right? On a job interview, you are interviewing each other. The employer doesn't hold all the cards, you hold just as many. And you have to have your walkaway point of where this is no longer a good deal for me to take and to be part of this organization. Because it's like you said, if you find out that you did not get what you wanted, either because you asked and they said no, or you didn't ask on the front end of it, what ensues is bitterness, resentfulness. You're not going to be happy at that job. And I hear people say, well, if they just paid me more money, I'd be happier. That's never the case.
No.
Right. So part of it is getting really clear. I talk about the ask is acknowledging, the A in ask is acknowledging that you are not confident in this area and you need help. Right. That outside resource and help. And typically it doesn't come from your family or your friends when you ask for help, because they know the person that you are up to this point, but they don't know who you are and what you're capable of beyond where you are today. And that's why I think hiring someone like me or you, we see the future, not the past. The people who we're working for and with see the person we are today and the past that's come with us.
Thank you for that. That is such a powerful point. And what I appreciate so much is you acknowledging that a lot of the mindset work is very difficult to do on your own, if not impossible. I know in my own career and even with my own business, there have been plenty of times where I have had to pull in a coach or an advisor, someone who I know, for the lack of a better phrase, was going to kick me in the tuchus
That's
and
right.
just haul off and belt me one when I needed it to get out of my own way on things.
That's right.
You can journal, you can reflect, you can meditate, you can think about all of this stuff that you want. But if you're the reason you're holding yourself back, it's time to pull someone in
That's
and
right.
help you get past those blocks that you can't either work through yourself or even see in that
Yep.
regard.
Absolutely. And I do think the work is impossible to do on your own. And the reason it's impossible is because these are stories that have shaped who you are. They are so much of the fabric of who you are and where you've been that you can't see the disparity in your own stories. So, like saying, my parents were in education, there's just no money in education. That is a belief that is so ingrained in you that you need somebody that's going to say, wait a second, right? That's not true. There is money there. There is money in nonprofit. You're just not asking for it. You're not looking at the way to go about it. And I think for me, I get really jazzed and excited when a client says to me, oh my gosh, I negotiated $10,000 more in 10 minutes because I was confident of who I was. And part of that, I just had a client go through, I call it the treasure hunt, because we sometimes are very limited in what we look at our view of what skills and resources and expertise we bring to the table. We think of our last job or our last skill set, but if we go all the way back, right, to who we were at the very beginning, and we look at all of that toolbox that we have with us, it's long and it's deep. And there are things that we may not have used, but that tool is still hidden down in there that is valuable and will be of value to somebody else. And that is what we're basing the money on. Not the last job that you did, but the experience that you bring in that entire toolbox with you.
How much mind drama do we help our clients work through when it comes to them saying something like, well, I really want $5,000 more than what they offered me? And they're hesitant to ask for it because they're afraid of hearing no. I loved your point about having that walkaway point.
Yeah.
But the other piece too in that is, and it goes back to what you said earlier, was you just have to ask for it.
You do. Yeah. And I can tell you from being in human resources within an organization that if you are offered the position, you are the one holding the cards right then.
Correct.
You are their number one choice. And they will usually work with you to make sure that you say yes, right? It is our own fear and limitations that are afraid to ask for that because, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask for that. So here's some things that women do not ask for. Men negotiate sign-on bonuses, sign-off bonuses. Like, if I leave this position, I'm going to walk away with this amount of money. They negotiate vacation time, benefits, parking spaces, office spaces. Like, when I tell women that, they literally are like, I didn't even know I could ask for that.
Yes.
I didn't even know I could ask for that, right? And yet, I was doing a keynote speaking event back earlier this year, and there were men in the audience, and we were talking about the same topic. And a man raised his hand and he said, how can I help? Right? And I said, we don't need help doing the job. We've got that down. Where we need help with is this right here, the negotiation, the disparity. When you see it, say it. Pull me into an office and have those conversations about, I think you're worth more. I think you would be good in this. I think that you would really thrive in this, job or career path. Those are the parts that we're not good with. And, a good friend of mine was in sales and promoted to a sales manager position. There was an East Coast manager. She became the West Coast manager. And when she was promoted, she had a conversation with her counterpart, right? Talking about, wow, the salary increase. And she was so happy with the job. And the next day he called her and he said, you talked about something that I just want to touch on. You said a salary increase. Immediately, she was like, oh my gosh, he didn't get it, right? That's what her mind went to. He said, I have a feeling, I did not get it, but I have a feeling it's because there's such a gap in what we're making that's why. He said, I know that we're told not to talk about money, but we need to talk about money. How much are you making? And when she shared it, he was making $50,000 more a year, even with her increase.
Wow.
That's the conversation, right? We're told not to talk about money because they don't want us to know that the person sitting beside us is making more money. Right? They don't want us to know, to have these conversations, to educate ourselves, to learn how to negotiate because it's better for us and not for them.
Christy, that is powerfully said. And I hope everyone who is listening to this is hitting their rewind 15 or 30-second button back to go back and listen to that. That is a powerful takeaway from today's conversation. I thank you for it. I thank you for sharing the stories and the experiences and the results and truly offering people an opportunity to simply ask and giving them permission to do so because other people are and they need to be doing it too.
That's right.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
My friend, time has flown by and we do need to start wrapping up. So as we do, what advice would you have to give someone to help them build their mid-career GPS?
The advice I would give is, really be honest if fear is holding you back. I think it is the number one thing that holds people back from pursuing their dream, asking for money, and really taking that step forward, and not to allow a decision that you made in college as what you wanted your career to be hold you back from where you are today. That would be my advice mid-career.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Love that. People want to get to know you more, connect with you, follow, learn more about what you do and how you can help them. The mic is yours. Tell us, please, how they can do all that.
You can find me on LinkedIn. That's usually the easiest place to find me. John, I'm sure you'll put the LinkedIn in the show notes.
I will.
Find me there. And, I work with clients both one-on-one and in small groups. And I think the small group is powerful in that they build a connection and a network. So to give them confidence and really support them through that transition. So there's pluses and minuses to each of them. And it really comes down to the individual and what they want to do.
I will make sure all of that is in the show notes for everybody. Christy Metcalf, thank you so much for spending some time with us today on the Mid-Career GPS podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, my pleasure. I'm going to offer everyone this. You're probably going to want to go back and listen to this again and just go back and listen to parts of it that resonated for you and what stood out for you, and certainly connect with Christy and reach out if you have any other questions in that regard. If you are looking for some help in building your mid-career GPS to get you to whatever is next, feel free to reach out to me as well. You can find me on my website at johnnerrell.com or connect with me on LinkedIn as well. Those are the two best places. Thank you for listening to today's conversation. And remember, we build our mid-career GPS 1 mile or 1 step at a time, and how we show up matters. Make it a great rest of your day. Thank you for listening to the Mid-Career GPS podcast. Make sure to follow on your favorite listening platform. And if you have a moment, I'd love to hear your comments on Apple Podcasts. Visit johnnerrell.com for more information about how I can help you build your mid-career GPS, or how I can help you and your organization with your next workshop or public speaking event. Don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn and follow me on social at John Nerrell Coaching. I look forward to being back with you next week. Until then, take care, and remember, how we show up matters.